just had some, but I'll do a little bit of brief housekeeping just for this session. So it's a 45-minute talk with 10 minutes of questions. We should aim to finish up around about 5 minutes past 10. Like Camilla said, if I can ask people to keep their mics muted one way around the other throughout the talk, then that would be fantastic. And then if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I can try and come back to them, or you can save your question till the end and we can make sure that they get addressed then. So if I can just introduce Camilla now. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Camilla Knight. Camilla completed her PhD in 2012 at the University of Alberta, looking at parental stresses in youth sport. Following this and a one-year postdoc at the University of Alberta, she moved to Swansea University, where she's been since 2013. So she obviously likes it there and is now obviously a professor. Camilla's research record is impressive. She has published over 60 peer-reviewed articles, has 5 book chapters, 1 book, which is excellent, by the way, so it's a shameless plug for Camilla, for free, mainly in the area of parenting and youth sport using qualitative methodologies. However, she has also published across wider areas of sports psychology, such as performance and well-being. As a function of her expertise, Camilla also has several consultancy roles, which allow her to transfer her research into practice, and this includes being the lead of the Welsh Advisory and Evaluation Group for the Child Protection in Sport Unit, a member of the Welsh Safeguarding in Sport Strategy Group, and the Youth Sport Lead for the Welsh Institute of Performance Science. So without doubt, Camilla is a leading authority in parenting and youth sport, and I'm very excited to hear her talk, as I assume you are all also. So without further ado, let me pass over to Camilla, whose talk is titled Understanding and Enhancing Parental Involvement in Sport.
Thank you, Max. You missed out the most important piece, was that I had a small part to play in your PhD, which was a very enjoyable experience. Thank you all so much for the invitation. I really appreciate having an opportunity to, sorry, I can't speak apparently, and try and share my screen. Here we go. There we go. I'm hoping you can see the full screen here. So thank you. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to come along and talk today. I have pitched this talk for context as if everyone in the room is coaches. But if you aren't a coach, it will still apply, and you might just need to think about it in 2 ways. Either if you were working with coaches to help them do kind of work with parents, or if you were working directly with parents as yourselves, a lot of these principles would apply. I have some lofty goals for my presentation today, probably too many, but we'll see how many we get through. And really what I want to get across are sort of 5 key things. Firstly, what is the role and the importance of parents within an athlete's sporting journey? I'm hoping that will be something that most of you are familiar with, but we'll touch on it anyway. Then I want to discuss a little bit around what influences parents' involvement. And for me, that's kind of really important. And that's where my research has really focused. Then we're going to move into, well, what would optimal parental involvement look like? And how could you as a coach or a sports scientist or a sports psychologist work to try and enhance that involvement? Max has already done a nice job of introducing me, but just for a little bit more context, I have 2 books, Max, come on. The key thing around my work is that I am an applied researcher, and what I mean by that is that I'm really interested in how we can ask research questions and conduct research which can then be translated into practice and really help people to enhance children's experiences really in sport. I think sport's a great avenue for people to have great experiences. And ultimately, I'm interested in how we can work with parents to optimize that. And the result of that is that I've spent a lot of time working with sports organizations. And increasingly, I realize that really is my passion and something that I'm really keen to sort of share. And a lot of the knowledge that I'm going to draw on today comes from that very practical applied experience of working within sports. Now to get into the meat of the talk. So my first thing is, and I don't need to answer this question, but I just want you to think, just take 10 seconds and think what comes to mind when you think of parents or you think of parental involvement in sport. So just really quickly, what are those key kind of ideas that come to mind? What are those key things that stand out? And the reason that I asked this question at this point is because whatever your answer to this question is, it's likely to frame everything you think about all of the rest of the content that I'm going to share today. And it's also likely to influence how you engage with parents, how challenging or how enjoyable you sort of see that, whether you see it as part of your role or not. And ultimately, the ease with which you're going to find applying some of the strategies that we discuss. So at this point, I'm not going to say anyone has a right or a wrong answer. It's just really useful whenever we start working with a population to think around, well, what actually is my initial reaction to working with this or these people? And that's really important to understand, because often we transfer or we transpose kind of our feelings onto others. And typically when I speak to coaches, there's a lot of hesitation around working with parents. And there's also an assumption that the majority of children or the majority of kids who are playing sport don't really like their parents' involvement either. But I've had the great privilege over the last 15 years of working in this area. And whilst there are stories and challenges that some children raise around the involvement of their parents, the vast majority of children have indicated that they recognize how important that they are, that they appreciate that they maybe wouldn't have made it in a talent pathway, which is what this quote comes from, without the support of their parents. And they even go as far as to say things like, we take them for granted. We don't recognize them enough for what they do. They're the ones who help us to think about things in the most positive ways. And that ultimately, because of the relationship that exists between parents and their child, the bond is closer, and consequently the opportunities for parents to support them and to be there for them are more than they are for anybody else. And it's so important that we recognize that we're working in this space for children, and we're working in this space to hopefully maximize enjoyment, hopefully maximize psychosocial outcomes and benefits, and ultimately to help children to reach their potential, whatever that may be. And so when we're thinking around working with parents and we're thinking around working in this space, we need to be very cognizant of what baggage or what challenges or what assumptions am I bringing with them, and do they fit with actually what children and young people are telling me. And typically in my experience, we start off sometimes on the slightly different pages, and that can make things challenging moving forward. And it's not just athletes who recall how important parents are. We see this within the scientific literature very consistently. And so when we seek feedback and when we review the evidence that's out there from parents, from coaches, from young people, from sports scientists, from managers, we know that parents are exceptionally important, and that we can typically classify their involvement and their roles in 3 different areas. The first one that comes to mind is that provider role, and lots of people, especially coaches, will often recount the importance of parents getting kids to training on time, making sure they're fed, making sure that they're got the right equipment, making sure that they've been competitions have been paid for, that training sessions have been paid for, etc., etc. And in doing all of those things, parents not only enable children to participate, but they also communicate to their children that their participation is important. Because if we didn't think sport was important as a parent, we would be unlikely to commit time and effort to doing those things. So it's not simply a kind of tangible role that parents are playing there, but it's also communicating the value of sport and the importance that's placed within there. Now, of course, that comes with a few considerations. If parents are over-investing and that becomes known to their child, so maybe if they're investing too much money or going beyond what they can really afford, whilst that is communicating value, that can come with some perceptions of pressure as well. But the role of parents expands far beyond just providing opportunities. Parents are also really important as role models. And so what we talk about here is around parents engaging in sport themselves. And typically that's where this research first came from. Again, recognizing that if parents are role modeling and engaging in sport, then their children will recognize that participation and involvement in sport is important. But we've also moved beyond that and recognized that how parents behave on the sidelines, how parents respond to winning, to losing, to teammates, can also provide an indication to children of this is how I should respond. And that leads us very nicely into this interpreter role. So we know that how parents communicate, how parents respond in different situations helps children to make sense of their sporting experience. So if you have a parent who is responding by recognizing personal growth and development, who's comforting on the sidelines, then they're communicating most often to their children that, you know, personal development's important, that it's not just about winning and losing. In contrast, if you have parents who are very focused on teamwork and leadership and those psychosocial characteristics, then you're more likely to see children valuing those as well. However, it's not just as simple as saying fulfill these 3 roles and everything will be rosy and straightforward. What we know is that what we need from parents, or what athletes need from parents, changes over time. So whilst those 3 roles are broadly consistent across a child's kind of sporting development, what it might look like in the areas that parents need to emphasize are likely to change. So when we think about that sampling phase, that period of time when children are just starting to play sport, the really important things from parents are around providing access to lots of different sporting opportunities and encouraging their children to find ones that they enjoy, instilling a love of being active and really emphasizing the importance of their effort and their development. As children start to progress and maybe choose to specialize in 1 or 2 sports, now we start to see parents having to work quite closely with coaches. They're likely to need to work with their child to help them decide which sports they want to engage in. It's really important at this stage that parents engage in what we call responsive support. So that is around recognizing that what different parents provide will need to look different for different children, but the most important thing is that the support is responsive to the individual child's needs. And then again, as children progress, if they decide that they want to go on and maybe try and reach the highest levels in sport and they invest in one particular area, well, now the parents' role shifts again and they become really, really important from an emotional support perspective and a financial support perspective, but their support is typically in the background. So at this point now, the athlete and the coach are likely to take a lot of the lead, but the parent is still really important here. And one of the myths, I think, that circulates around parents is that, you know, once your child becomes a teenager and once they move into those higher levels, you're not important. And it's definitely a myth that comes around in sport, which is, well, now it's all about the coach and really parents shouldn't be involved. Parents will always be important in children's lives, not least because a lot of the ways that parents have engaged with their children have become internalized over time, but also because parents, especially now, continue typically to be a source of financial support. So rather than parents becoming less important, what we see is just other people increasingly become important. And what are the consequences? Well, when parents are able to do all of these things, when parents are able to engage in these really positive ways and these ways that are responsive to their children, we know it leads to a whole host of positive outcomes, which you can see on the bottom of the slide here. And those range from enjoyment to life skills to protecting athletes from safeguarding issues. On the other hand, and what we often hear about when coaches are talking around parents are a lot of these negative consequences. So when parents maybe aren't involved in the ways that we perceive are correct or the ways in which their children would like them to be involved, we see issues around anxiety, fear of failure, burnout, dropout, conflict, etc. However, I do want to raise a bit of a concern with what I've presented there, which is this dichotomous thinking about parents. This idea that there's things that parents can do which are right, that lead to positive outcomes, and things that parents can do which are wrong, that lead to negative outcomes. And when you look at a lot of this early sport parenting literature, and when you look at a lot of the work that's produced for coaches about parents, there's an assumption that if parents just do these things, almost like a tick list of right things, then we'll have all these positive outcomes and vice versa. But the literature actually isn't supportive of that. What the literature indicates, as I've alluded to already, is that the consequences, whether they're positive or negative, for different athletes will vary depending on the extent to which parents' involvement and behaviors match the needs of their child. And it's really important when we're working in different sports, in different environments, with individuals from different cultures, and obviously individuals from different dyads, so parent-child dyads, that we recognize that we cannot just transfer an assumption of what we as individuals think is good or bad onto all of those different situations. What's most important is that we need to understand what's going on for that child and what's going on for that parent, and how can they work together with the support of us as coaches or sports psychologists or sports scientists to maximize the success of that interaction and that relationship. And in doing that, one of the things that I've really pushed for, which I think has been widely neglected within the coaching literature, is a recognition of parents' experiences. So parenting children, if there's anyone on the call who's a parent, will know that it's got highs and lows, and those can happen within a space of a 5-minute period or a 5-day period or 5 weeks or 5 months. It's ever changing, and parenting children who are involved in sport is exactly the same, often maximized. So you've got children who really care about their sport, who are related because they've been successful or they've had a good performance or they've been selected. And then suddenly they've had a bad game, something's gone wrong, they've fallen out with a teammate, they've perceived that the coach has done something that they don't like, they're disappointed, and all of your emotions change with that as well. And so what we know is that for parents, when they're trying to manage their children's emotions, that is incredibly challenging at times. And I become very frustrated when coaches and people, especially on social media, just say, well, parents should just get a grip. You know, it's just sport. It doesn't matter. It is just sport, but it's their child. And the bond that exists between parents and children are very, very different to the bond that exists between a child and any other adult in their life. And it's much harder than we think to just manage emotions when it becomes related to your child. Parents also struggle sometimes with just all of the different demands that are placed on them associated with sport, finance, time, being places at at certain times, at times that maybe clash with work, at times that clash with other commitments for their child. Parents have to balance all of the different aspects of their life, their own working life, other children, a social life if they dare to think that they might have one. And all of this balancing and these demands put additional pressures on parents. And within that, and I'm going to unpack this a little bit more, parents also have to parent within very tight expectations from society, which are also always changing. So as I mentioned before, what we need from parents change over time, and the expectations of parents are also changing over time. So there's a whole lot of pressure and a whole lot of stress which is placed on parents, which can make that experience quite challenging, and consequently how they're involved in their child's sporting life also more difficult than just a list of positive and negative things to execute. Now, when we think about these kind of societal expectations of parents, anyone who's a parent will know that there is a lot of pressure to parent in certain ways. And even if you choose to parent in a different way, you can't avoid the kind of narrative around good parenting. And in recent years, the good parenting narrative suggests that you have children who are active, you have children who are engaged in a lot of adult regulated activity, you have children who demonstrate success in a tangible way. So within sport, that's achieving at quite high levels. And it's also ensuring that you have children who are social and personal and personable and approachable and know how to engage in all sorts of different situations. And for a parent, that comes with a whole lot of challenge around, well, how do I parent? What activities should I engage my child in? What should I support them to do? How should I maximize sort of my involvement to reach those sorts of outcomes? It's also got a specific narrative within sport, which suggests that good sport parents are quiet, that good sport parents don't challenge coaches, they don't ask questions, they do what they're told. And what we know from the literature is that the result of that is actually that parents have felt that they can't step in when abuse is occurring, or when they are worried about what's happening for their child, because there's a perception that that's not what good parents do, that actually a good parent will just sit on the sidelines, be silent, and let the coach get on with their job. But as I often say to coaches, the challenge with that is it makes an assumption that you can deal with every single thing on your own. And why would you do that when there's someone on the sideline who knows the child really, really well, might have some great insights to help you understand what's going on for them or why they've maybe reacted in the way they have? Why would we silence that rather than embrace them and use them as part of the team? So what's the take home there? Hopefully in that last 15 minutes or so, you've got an idea that parents are important, that they have a substantial influence, and we do need them to be involved, but it's complicated. It's not as straightforward as maybe we typically assume or we hope to see. So what actually would we be wanting them to do? There's a few different ways of thinking around parental involvement, and for ease, I've just chosen to draw on one of the grounded theories that I produced during my PhD, which was generated specifically within tennis, but I've seen it play out in different sports. And ultimately, what this theory suggests is that when parents are best involved in their children's sporting experience, they are engaged in a way that demonstrates that they understand what's going on for their child, that they're specifically focused on enhancing their individual child's journey, and they see it as a journey. So they recognize that it changes over time and that it exists over a prolonged period of time. And underpinning that kind of involvement are three key areas. The first is that parents and children have shared and communicated goals. And what I mean by that is parents and children are on the same page, and that they remain on the same page throughout the journey. So they recognize why they both wanted their child to be involved in sport and where changes may happen. And typically we focus on this from a child's perspective. So, a child wants to play sport to have fun, and then over time, as they're maybe a little bit more successful, they want to play to get selected for something or to achieve a certain outcome. And typically we assume that parents, just follow along. But what the evidence would tell us is that parents bring their children to sport and introduce them to sport for a variety of reasons. And sometimes those get changed by the environment as well. So being in a competitive environment where there's a lot of emphasis typically placed upon winning, without realizing within a year or so, parents' goals of their child having fun, participating in sport for health reasons can shift quite considerably to, well, actually, it does matter that they win, that it does matter how they perform. And that's not even always a conscious change. So recognizing the importance that parents and children are on the same page, but that they need to communicate about what they're doing is necessary to allow development. Building on the foundation of shared and communicated goals, there's two elements that need to be happening at the same time. The first one is around parents developing an understanding emotional climate. And what we mean there is it's a broad parenting approach where you demonstrate that you are seeking to understand what is going on for your child, both within and outside of sport. And then specifically within competitions, that you're there and you are attempting to do things which will help your child to have the best possible experience when they're competing. And within there's the theory, there's a few different nuances, but I'm going to break them down a little bit now around, well, what does that mean for you as coaches or sports scientists? Well, firstly, if we think about shared and communicated goals, as a coach or a sports scientist, what does this mean? Well, it means firstly that you need to probably be working with athletes to help them understand what they're trying to do and why they're involved. Often, and I know there's people on the call here who work at universities, often we find when students arrive at university, sometimes they just give up sport that they've played all of their lives. And when you ask them why, they were like, I don't really know why I was playing it. I just did. It was the thing I did on a Thursday night and a Monday night, and now my parents aren't taking me, so I don't go anymore. But actually, if we want parents to be able to be involved in the best ways and to maximize their support and their involvement to their child, the child first needs to know, what am I trying to do here? Why do I want to be involved? And also, recognizing when those things change. The second thing is providing parents with that same opportunity to reflect and think about, well, why do we have our child involved in sport? Why are we investing time, investing money, investing emotion into their involvement? And most importantly, as a coach, one of the really useful things that you can do is give parents and children an opportunity to discuss this. Actually just putting them in a room, giving them some questions and some prompts and saying, let's talk about why you're involved and are you actually on the same page, and introducing those opportunities at multiple times through a season, typically whenever there's a transition that occurs. That's going to be really useful, because we know that parents and children start to change their reasons for involvement when there are normative, so anticipated transitions, or non-normative transitions, typically within sport, one being relationships. So when children start to have their first relationships, and maybe relationships go well or go badly, we can see involvement and reasons for participating in sport starting to change. Now, with regards to developing and understanding emotional climate, you've started that work by helping the child to recognize why they were involved in sport. But now it's around helping a child or a young person to communicate those reflections with a parent and a coach to try and get you all on the same page around, what's going on for me within sport at the moment? What am I enjoying? What am I not enjoying? Where am I trying to develop? What do I think about my teammates? What do I think about my coach? Encouraging athletes to really recognize, what's going on for them, so that a parent can respond appropriately. When we talk about responsiveness or responsive support, it's really important that an athlete has a good understanding of their child and what their child's trying to achieve, so that they can react in appropriate ways. We also know, and we see this consistently across different ages of athletes, that when they're seeking feedback and they're seeking guidance from their parent, they much prefer it if their parent understands the sport. And so actually, as a coach, giving information to parents around what it is that's going on, the fundamentals of the sport, what you're working on, the goals, the emphasis for this period of the season or for this season, is really useful in helping a parent to be educated and consequently be able to demonstrate that they understand what's going on. Where children really don't like feedback from their parents is when they just don't have a clue about the sport. And I'm smiling because I recall some 8, 9-year-olds who just said, well, they try and tell me, but they just don't know the moves. They were talking about gymnastics. And it's really annoying because they get the words wrong and then it's embarrassing. But as a parent, how can you say the right things if no one's sort of helped you to learn? And one of the big issues that coaches have is that parents go off and seek information on the internet, which, as we all know, is unregulated, although there is some great stuff out there. But if we don't tell parents, they're going to try and find the information somewhere. And then the other aspect to consider is just what all the benefits that come from the different experiences that are associated with sport. Because as a parent, if you understand all of those different things, you can understand where sport might fit in it for your child, but also you can help to emphasize, the pros and the cons associated with involvement and help to keep sport in perspective. And then finally, when we start to talk about competitions, this is typically where we see a lot of the negative comments and the negative challenges raised about parents. But as a coach, apologies, there's a typo on that slide. As a coach, it can be really challenging to manage parents at competitions, but we also don't often do anything to help parents to be involved in the best possible ways. So firstly, we need to know, what do athletes want? Some athletes love their parents cheering, some want them silent. Some athletes like to have feedback immediately after a game, some like to have it in the car, some don't like to have it at all. Some like their parents to be silent before games, some like them after. You as a coach might have a view around what you think parents should do, but the most important thing is knowing, what do the athletes want? So spending time with athletes, working out what they want and how that might fit within kind of the broader warm-up and post-game situations, and sharing that information with parents is key. Helping parents to prepare for competitions is really, really useful. And one of the things I spend a lot of time doing with parents is trying to help them understand, well, if my child's injured, how am I likely to feel? How am I likely to react? If this situation occurs, there's a perceived unfair decision from a referee. What am I going to do? How can I react? How do I want to be known? With all the preparation, though, you still can't replace the actual experience, but often helping parents to just think around what those situations may be can help them to mentally be ready for when they arise. And linked to that, working with parents directly to give them some strategies, so some coping strategies to manage the different emotions and the different scenarios that they encounter can be useful. And some of that could simply be actually giving parents tasks to do. We know that parents typically want to be involved at competition. They want to feel like they're being helpful, and giving them tasks around managing, I don't know, recording of different bits to do with the game, or making sure that people are in the right place, can all be a really helpful avenue for engaging parents in the best possible ways. So hopefully what you've got from that is recognizing that actually through coaches, as a coach, working with parents can help parents to enhance athletes' experiences and consequently your experiences as well as a coach. But expanding on that more broadly, I want to suggest that you could go beyond those suggestions associated with that theory, where we're just looking at those three areas, and actually think more broadly around, well, what am I doing as a coach or a sports scientist or a sports psychologist to ensure that some of the key elements that I've highlighted already are being hit? And when I say key areas, whilst I haven't explicitly stated them, I have alluded to the first thing is around recognizing what athletes need or what children need. And so as a coach, you can be working with parents to facilitate opportunities to talk and discuss. And these can be great fun. I've had things where we've gone, if you were an animal, what animal would you be? And then spent 1 hour getting to the point of why are you involved in sport? We have opportunities for children and parents to talk about, their expectations of each other, what they thought of each other's performance and each other's behaviors in different situations, really trying to make these social opportunities. Off the back of that, it can be really useful to provide parents with that information, as I talked about. And often coaches say, oh, but I don't have the time for these extended, I don't know why we always do 6 of them, 6 sessions with parents where I talk through, different outcomes. It doesn't need to be like that. It can be really informal. It can be really creative. It can be Q&A sessions. It can be doing a lap of the pitch. It can be putting things on whiteboards. I think I should have marketing shares in whiteboards, because they're my favorite things. Put whiteboards around, leave messages for parents, let children leave messages for parents, make it a really interactive way so that parents can get information to address children's needs. And then reinforce when parents are doing things that are useful, that are helpful, that seem to have a positive implication. I think if we all reflected, we all feel better when someone says, yeah, that's good, that's useful, that's helpful, where individuals start to feel valued and respected. And actually, when we positively reinforce what we want from parents and what seems to be having positive implications for the athletes that we're working with, then parents are much more likely to repeat those. But we also have to recognize, as I said before, that parenting's really tough. I have a 3-year-old, and I'll tell you, parenting's really tough. And parenting children involved in sport is really challenging at times. So actually, as a coach, if you can work with parents to try and address some of their needs, that can be really useful. So thinking around the fact that that children's sporting activities typically become parents' social activities, giving parents opportunities to get to know each other, integrating some social activities, encouraging parents to go for coffees together, parent networks where they can start to lift share is really, really useful. But also recognizing that some of the actions that you as a coach or a sports psych engage in will impact on parents is important as well. So parents typically plan things very far in advance. They don't have a lot of flexibility in their schedules. And in sport, we often like to send information out last minute because we don't select a team until 2 days before a competition, or we change things because of the weather or because the physio is not available or whatever. The sooner we can provide information to parents, the better. The more we can stick to the plans, the better. And the more we can explain why we've had to change things or why information is coming out late, the better. But recognizing that actually, if you've decided you're only ever going to select a team 1 day before a game, parents might decide that there's something else they need to do. That has to be a little bit of the give and take. But the other thing that's really important, and you'll see that these all kind of merge together, is actually parents are much more able to cope with all of the different demands and all of the different challenges that they're encountering if their children can cope. I have the privilege of working with very young tennis players. And so you sometimes have 8- and 9-year-old tennis players representing Great Britain, and they are out there on their own, and they have no one to turn to. They're out on the court, and sometimes they're nervous, and sometimes they're scared, and sometimes they're excited, and they experience all of these emotions, and the parent sees them experiencing all of those emotions. And if they can't cope with them, if we haven't stepped in and helped them to be able to cope with the different pressures and the different demands that they're experiencing, then their parents feel it and they want to step in. And that's sometimes where we see some of the behaviors that we maybe don't like to see. So actually, as coaches and as practitioners, I'd say we have a duty of care and a responsibility to make sure that the children and the young people we're working with can cope with the expectations placed on them. But it has the additional benefit of actually also addressing parents' needs, which is that their children are able to cope. And so rather than just targeting support and information at parents, actually thinking around the additional benefit of sports psych support with athletes is useful. But all of these things are limited if we don't actually consider the overall environment that we're creating. And at the beginning of this talk, I asked you to think around, what comes to mind when you think about parents? And some of you, I'm sure, will have said they're really beneficial, they're great volunteers, they're really positive, and others will have just gone, don't want to think about parents, they're not part of my job, they're an unnecessary addition, I don't have the time for them, I'm always having to manage them, they're going to stress me out, they're going to text me at the weekend, they're going to challenge every decision, I just want to sort of avoid them. And there's many famous quotes around, the best team to coach would be a team of orphans. That's a ridiculous statement. Think about the experience for those children, even if we say it in a flippant way. And ultimately, if we want parents to be able to be involved in the best possible ways, if we want parents to be able to really provide the support that we know is beneficial and needed for young people, we need to think about the environment that we're creating. A lot of that comes down to language. Are we managing parents, or are we working with them? Are parents an unnecessary burden, or are they part of the team? Do we welcome them in our space? Can they be at training? Do we make sure there's teas and coffees, that there's somewhere for them to sit if possible? Or do we say you drop off and you go and you're not allowed to watch and we don't really want to hear from you? Do we have social events? Do we let them into the space so that they can be present with their children? Parents only get their children as children for a short period of time, and often they want to see what's going on, recognizing that. We also need to recognize and respect the knowledge that parents have. You know, parents do bring all of that expertise around their child. And yes, children can be different in different settings, but sometimes asking a parent, what makes your child tick? Why might they have responded like that? Is something going on at home? Can be really useful for your coaching practice, but also that they're not just parents. You might have on your team parents who are lawyers, who are academics, who are doctors, who can bring a vast array of information and support that might be useful for your team. And actually respecting what parents bring is really useful. And finally, it's around valuing parents. You know, I've talked a little bit today around how challenging it is for parents, and ultimately without parents committing the time and money and effort to youth sport, many coaches wouldn't have the jobs that they have and wouldn't be involved in the ways that they are. And one of the simplest things that I've seen to be the most powerful is simply thanking parents. So when you've got a meeting, starting off by thanking parents for what they've got to do, thanking them for the ways that they're contributing to the team, and ultimately living what I like to call a parent positive philosophy and creating a parent positive environment will allow parents to do all those great things that we've talked about already. And just wrapping up here, you know, I've talked a lot around the importance of parents. So hopefully you've got that. I've talked a lot about the challenges for parents, and I'm hoping you've got a flavor of what it's like for parents. I've talked a little bit around what we would like to see from parents, which is associated with the most positive outcomes. And I've talked a little bit around what you as coaches can be doing to support that. But ultimately, it is around recognizing and committing time to developing relationships with parents. And I recognize, I'm not naive, and I've done research in this area, I recognize that parents can be seen as very challenging for coaches. And that often coaches say the majority of parents are great, but it's just some of those additional challenges from those certain parents that put me off. And this is where it comes down to you as a coach, committing proactively in advance to setting some boundaries, to having a commitment to developing a relationship, to sharing a little bit about what it's like to be a coach and the other commitments and the other challenges that you're trying to manage, so that it is a two-way relationship. And it's not one where you as a coach feel that parents are just trying to take. And ultimately, that can only occur if you embed working with parents and engaging with parents as a standard part of your practice. It can't be seen as an addition that actually, when I'm time poor and there's a lot of pressures happening, that I don't want to do it. You know, I know typically if coaches are paid at all, it's for sort of a set block and there's not additional time built in there to talk to parents, but maybe you could look at integrating that within your time. Or if you're a volunteer and you volunteer for 2 hours, shifting your thinking so it's 2 hours and 15, and you always know you've got a 15-minute additional slot to working with parents, just allows you to embed that work and fundamentally to maximize and proactively work with parents so that you as a coach can have strong relationships with parents, that you're in a position to be able to do a number of those different tasks and those different activities that I've suggested, and ultimately to enhance parental involvement for the benefit of children, young people, yourselves as coaches, and if you're a sports psychologist, you know, for all of the different outcomes that we would be seeking to achieve. So just to finish up, if you've taken nothing from this talk but this final slide, that would sum it up nicely. But parents are critical. Parents are an absolutely key part of the youth sport journey. And whether you're listening to this call as a sports scientist, a sports psychologist, or a coach, recognizing that and seeing them as a really key population with whom to work is key. Obviously, not all parents currently are involved in the best possible ways. And again, this, no matter what your role is, making sure that you understand what we do want from parents and how you can support parents to do that is really, really key. And being proactive in your engagement with parents is the only way to really achieve those outcomes. And with that whistle-stop tour of way too many things, but hopefully you've picked some things up. I'd just like to thank you again for the invitation and welcome any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Camilla. I'm sure there is a virtual round of applause going on right now. People clapping in front of their computers. Do we have any questions from the floor? And feel free to put your hand up or jump on the mic.
And if there aren't, Max, I'll just make you ask some. We'll put you on the spot. It'll be like when you're a PhD student.
Be back in the seminars again. Well, I've got I think we have got one hand up there. I'm just scrolling through. Okay, yeah, Paul, are you happy to come on the mic and answer that?
Absolutely. Thanks very much. I found that quite interesting. I'm a volunteer coach for a small, well, what was a small club, coaching basketball to about 15 children over the last 3 years, increased to about 300. What myself and my co-coach suffer from is the fact that we have such a vast number of children wanting to get involved, and we're really struggling to get parental involvement to support us, such that we've got 3 parental helpers from the 300 children on our books. And I find it fascinating that engagement you're talking about to try and bring them on that journey with us. We will hopefully bring them in a little bit closer, but it's finding that additional time to devote. I say we're already volunteers devoting a lot of time to these children, to devote to actual parent development as well. What are the key things to initially gain a parent's interest, to even if it's just to come in and watch and help be a second eye on a field of or on a court of young children running around? How do we get that initial bite?
So my first thing would be to have the first activity that you do in the early part of the season, or when children are first starting, to be something that is parent and children related. So typically the first engagement you have is that parents drop them off for a training session, and the training session happens and maybe the parents hang around. But actually, if you're able to just factor in something as a session before that, where maybe you can have a little bit of a social combined with some training, or you take your first training session, you just make it a little bit shorter and you integrate some social, you have opportunities for conversations, you really build that community in those first few sessions. That can be really, really helpful, because then you haven't set the ground as like, we're here for the players. You've said we're here for the children and for the parents. Then it's about trying to integrate some opportunities within training, where maybe you have kind of a lap of the court, or you have a lap of kind of the stands with the parents, where you just quickly catch up and you start to recognize what they can contribute. And ultimately then it's about also making sure that parents have an awareness of, this is all of the things that need to get done, and this is what's required to kind of execute a successful season. And I think we again would have those conversations early in a season around, for this to happen, we need all of these to take place. And if you want this to happen, we also need all of this to happen. So I think it's just around that really early engagement. And I know time is always really pressured especially with volunteer coaches. But the more time that can be spent up front, in my experience, the more time that is saved down the line in terms of dealing with, I don't know, conflicts or concerns or challenges. So it would be really just around setting the tone that, you know, having parents part of it is the number one thing.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, upfront, absolutely. I think you've probably hit the nail on the head with where we need to focus there. Thank you very much. Really interesting chat.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. I know that Adam's got his hand up, but I'm going to go over to Keith, just because obviously Adam's on one of the co-hosts. So I'm going to dodge him and see if Keith can answer their question.
Hi, thanks very much. Yeah, our local squash club has started coaching sessions for parents, and I think it's a great thing to do. I was just wondering, just from your knowledge, really, if there's any potential pitfalls to that or benefits. I can't see any pitfalls myself, but
I think it's a great thing to be doing. You know, all of the evidence that we have would say the more parents understand a sport, then the more they're able to be involved in the best possible way. So definitely having sessions for parents so that they can understand rules and regs, and also the challenges of how hard it is to learn the sport and why things might go wrong, really, really beneficial. The only potential pitfall, I suppose, would be if the parents then suddenly thought they knew more than they knew. You know, that I've had 3 sessions and so now I can become the coach, but I think that could be managed pretty clearly just around boundaries and expectations. And, you know, the benefits of learning it are so that you can have engaged conversations with your child rather than take over coaching of them. But I would generally be supportive of, you know, more sports trying to get parents involved in that sort of way.
thank you.
Excellent. I think we maybe got time for maybe one more. I know we've got a question here in the chat from Hugh McCann saying, is there any research in respect to players/athletes that do not have parental support in terms of the types of support that they are receiving other than, you know, in the absence of that parental support?
So there's evidence of children who have made it despite how their parents are involved, and you read a lot around that in sort of autobiographies and those sorts of things, you know, where maybe the parents have been involved but in quite challenging ways. And I guess we always hear stories in all sorts of realms of people who've made it despite negative involvement. And, you know, we do know that comes at a lot of well-being consequences as well. So definitely not something that we would encourage. In terms of players or athletes who've done it without parents at all, like even the kind of the negative types of involvement, I'm struggling to think of any literature that would sort of talk to that point. I mean, sometimes there's grandparents, so there's somebody who takes on that role because just the way our sporting system is set up, it's really challenging. I should caveat it with, you know, the majority of our research comes out of kind of Western societies. And so I don't know what's kind of happening maybe in some other cultures where maybe there's more of a collective approach and there's not a specific parent, but I would struggle to find someone who's made it without some sort of involvement, even if that's more negative involvement, but it would have been underpinned by the provision of sort of tangible support at the minimum.
Excellent. Thank you. I know we've got one more question, but I'm just conscious of time. So I would say, Emma, Camilla has very kindly included her email there. So please feel free to get in touch with Camilla. I'm sure she'll be more than happy to answer any more questions. And that's obviously to the wider participation pool as well. So I want to thank you once again, Camilla, for a fantastic talk, and looking forward to hopefully seeing you throughout the rest of the showcase as well, but I understand you're very busy. So if I pass over to Amelia now, and she will talk a little bit about sort of the next 10 minutes or so.
Apologies, turns out I've muted myself. So if I just quite quickly get into the thing. There we go. I'm hoping everyone can see that okay. So we've got a short break now, and then we will move on to our sports psychology insight talks. So as I said, these are academics, etc. But yeah, I want to just thank Max and Camilla for that amazing keynote. So yeah, quite quick break. Please return quite promptly for a 10:10 start. And this is the kind of timetable as such. So start at 10:10, 3 lots of 20-minute talks.